Once I reach 1,000 subscribers, I will always have a live chat on the first Friday of the month at 8 p.m. So please subscribe, click on the bell, and let's get 1,000 subscribers very soon. Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Rome never existed. Everyone knows Rome, and I think the name of Rome doesn't need any further explanation. But to mention a few things. Rome changed everything, and by everything I mean everything. From technology, to culture, to languages, to knowledge, to economy, literally everything changed under Rome. Europe bases itself on Greco-Roman ideals, and many kingdoms, empires in Europe and also in Asia, Africa, if you count in the Ottomans, consider themselves to be the successors to Rome. Russia is also known as the Third Rome. Catholicism, the most famous and most spread confession of Christianity, is Roman Catholic. And also a few of the world languages such as Spanish, Portuguese and French, they are an immediate consequence of Rome. The Latin alphabet, which we take as granted, and then all the consequences of Rome affected Africa, the Americas, Australia and even Asia. But what if all of this never happened and we were in a different timeline? A timeline without Rome. What if Rome just never existed? We could just go on and say Rome would never be founded. But the legends around the foundations of Rome are that, legends. The area of Rome was always populated by people, so the most obvious point of divergence would be that Rome would just be conquered by the Etruscans. The Etruscans, they had some type of federation in OTL. By this time this federation will become more concrete. It will fill in the gap that Rome left. This will happen around the times where the Romans had their first wars in OTL, and it would take much more concrete forms when the Celts would plunder northern Italy. This Etruscan federation would have one city which would gain a lot of power and then eventually become the capital of the Etruscans. The federation would centralize more and more and become Razna. As a result, the Etruscans become a regional power and protector of smaller cities which were greatly damaged by the Celts. So far so good. Most of the things around the world they continue and nothing major is butterflied away, until Syracuse would win against Messina. And to have a geographical area, we are talking about Sicily. I don't believe that the Etruscans would just like expand the Romans, as they just didn't have any business there with Messina or in Sicily. The Celts would remain unchanged for a long time, but after this time they would somehow civilize or make their own federation, and the federation would be a decentralized federation, but eventually one ruler would somehow establish himself. The Celts had many capable rulers in the past eventually, and it would just be a matter of time until a very good ruler would impose himself. The Celtic expansion will most likely start after the dispute with Massilia, and they would end up taking Massilia and parts of Savoy or Savoie. The second expansion will bring the Celts to the Po Valley, where the Etruscans would also become more of an actual state. And the second expansion is to be differentiated from the invasion that the Celts had before, because in there the Celts, they were still decentralized, and here we are talking about the federation of the Celts. The third expansion mainly in southern and central France, the fourth taking almost all of Iberia and Carthaginian parts of France, the fifth expansion until the Rhine, and the Celts will have very good geographical borders, but in the meantime they would have made many enemies as well. The Germanics, they would continuously attack them, the Iberians would not be easily submitted in this timeline, and the Etruscans, there were no pushovers, and Carthage, well, is Carthage, they rule the sea. Thracia, Illyria and Dacia would become centralized around 200 BC due to the extensive contacts with the Greek states, the Etruscan Federation, or also Resna, and the Celts. Carthage would have a sweet time until the Celts would press harder towards Iberia, and it would leave Carthage not much choice but to go and expand first into western France. But then when the Celts show up again, they would secure trade routes in Cornwall and Western Africa, and further beyond into the British Isles. After the Celts would successfully take all of Iberia, Carthage would be split into a small British Carthage and Neo-Carthage, which would mostly focus on Africa. Communication would take too long, too much time. After being kicked off Iberia by the Celts and suffering civil wars, power-hungry people could establish more of an empire or kingdom or absolute monarchy in Britain and even in Neo-Carthage. The times of the Merchant Republic is over. The loss of Iberia would be a huge blow to the trade empire. However, it would take a lot of time to find resources and places of income that they could replace with the ones they had in Iberia, but it was not impossible. The Etruscans would probably lose their foothold on sea against Syracuse and Carthage at first. Have also inner troubles. But then, when the Celts go for Iberia, the Etruscans might manage to take on Syracuse, who would then have problems with Cyrene, which I will come back later, and work their way until Sicily and perhaps even Sardinia and Corsica. Rasna would have Cyrene as potential ally, and they would most likely still have the same building style, and also much later the Celts would copy them and it would spread slower, but infrastructure would advance all around the region, and it would advance, and due to the more competition that exists between the countries, it might evolve independently, and technology would also evolve differently, but there would be a lot of evolution. While Carthage is in the civil war and split, Cyrene would take advantage of it. They had an important trade port, they were an important trade port as well, former Greek colony, and they would probably love to take the spot and get money to stand against Egypt. Thus, Cyrene would get independent from Egypt and stand on their own, weakening the Ptolemaic Empire. The Ptolemaic Empire would follow the footsteps of the Seleucid Empire and split too. To give you a concrete information where the Cyrene city or where Cyrenaica is, it's in the western part of Libya, in the eastern part of Libya in the north. Macedon would lead Greece and some smaller cities and have wars with its neighbors. We are now around 100 BC. Punic Britain would start to take certain areas of Britain and Ireland. More trade ports would be established, but also contacts to Iceland and Scandinavia would exist, where amber, timber, iron, slaves, fur, and so on would be traded. and this would set the basis for a Punic British hegemony. And it would butterfly away a lot of things such as the Viking raids and the Kievan Rus. The evolution and the expansion of Punic Britain could continue for some centuries until it would be disrupted by the Germanics. The Celts would face continuous troubles from the Germanics, but they would be able to expand until the Elbe River, as there were no similar conditions like OTL that led to the Battle of Teutoburg. The Etruscans or Razna would still be stuck in the Po Valley, but have expanded well into Corsica, Sardinia and Sicily. Syracuse would be defeated and it would put the Etruscans at odds with Macedon, but also with Illyria and many other parts. And Cyrene, the Etruscans could then manage to switch the balance of power to their side. Illyria and Thrace would be able to invade most of Greece with Cappadocia, and they would have then the advantage of the power. And when I talk about Greece, I meant Macedon. And Cappadocia would also have the other advantage that the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic kingdom don't exist, so they could easily dominate all of Anatolia and replace in one way or another the Seleucids or the Ptolemaic kingdom. Northern Africa would be dominated by Cyrene. Most of Neo-Carthage would still face troubles. The smaller successors of the Ptolemaic kingdom would fight each other, and Cyrene would expand, have a strong trade presence, and they would start to replace Carthage's position for a while only. But we come back to that much later. I think that in the Middle East a Jewish kingdom would have a chance to re-emerge amidst trouble and become an ally to Cappadocia. We are now around the year 0. Christianity, if it exists, will only be small and only within Judaism. Only for some years this Jewish kingdom could expand into Egypt, Syria and get a border with Cyrene and even Cappadocia, until they would face Parthia as a new rival, where they would get taken out one after one. Parthia was able to compete on an equal foot with Rome, and having weaker powers in the Middle East will open up a huge Parthian expansion. This will have a good consequence for Neo-Carthage. They would rise again from the death and push Cyrene back and reclaim their spot, although they would still have to fight the Celts, who actually took a few parts of Ceuta, and the Etruscans too, who were able to become better on sea. Constant wars with Illyria and the Celts made the Etruscans stronger, and the centralization made Razna evolve into some type of dictatorship, while the Celts could have an elective monarchy, and Neo-Carthage would probably take a similar direction as the Etruscans. In the 2nd century, Parthia would almost be a successor of the Achaemenid Empire, while Dacia, the Etruscans and Thracia dominate the Balkans. The Celts would actually be pushed back from all sides almost, and the Etruscans were able to use the Alps and the Highlands in Savoy as defensive barrier. During the 3rd and 4th century, the Celts would somehow resist the Germanic invasion, as they already pacified Germania, and the Germanics would then rampage Illyria, Thracia, Dacia, and even rampage further into Parthia. Parthia, who would be the sick man in the Middle East due to their overextension and whatnot, would start to collapse, and we might actually see some Germanic kingdoms in Anatolia, keeping some Greek but mostly Persian Parthian traditions. A huge period of destabilization would also follow, especially in the Balkans for the Celts, for Crimea, even Anatolia, but not so much for the Etruscans. While the Huns came and would rampage everything, New Carthage, who expanded well into Egypt, would try to take Iberia back and also successfully take at least the southern part with silver and many important resources, leaving the Celts on the brink of destruction. With the pressure from Punic Britain and later on the Slavs that would come, the Celts would be destroyed as well, and Slavic kingdoms, they would be established on most of former Celtic territories. The Baltics and Scandinavia would be firmly in the hand of the Baltic British Punic trade empire, which would influence later on an alternate Russia as well, which would become more like Novgorod of OTL. The last Parthian remnants would be taken by an Arab Völkerwanderung, and they would too form kingdoms on their own and compete mostly with New Carthage and the Greco-Persian or Greco-Parthian Germanic kingdoms of Anatolia. The Mongols, they would then also come and change Asia as in OTL, but destroy the continuation of this Baltic British Punic trade empire. They would get their ties cut with the Silk Road, lose power, and Punic Britain would look further ahead for Northern America, for fur, timber, and slaves. Democracy might evolve from Greco-Persian kingdoms, Greco-Persian Germanic kingdoms, while the Slavic Celtic kingdoms would set more favorable conditions for a further elective or even constitutional monarchy. Of course, it would be something way different, but it could come up to this same idea. Razna would certainly at one point get a dictator who would not like to relinquish his power, and in there we would get examples of an absolute monarchy, or actually something that would still be called a tyranny. Zoroastrianism would probably stay dominant and spread throughout the Middle East, and if it has favorable conditions, maybe also until Europe. Paganism can reform, or it will be reformed, into an easier and more suitable religion for those that have power within a set kingdom. The religion will be tailored into the favor of the elite. Feudalism will not appear, Europe and the whole Mediterranean will be less united and also way less Hellenized. Greek might still be a lingua franca, but have strong concurrence from Persian, whereas in the west of the Mediterranean, Punic would have high chances to replace Greek as lingua franca. Africa will have no influence from Christianity and Islam, but places like Mali, for instance, might still appear and become trade partners of New Carthage, who would have a monopoly over African trade. Depending on how precious gold could be seen, this would be enough for other powers to set foot on the American continent. A Slavic Celtic kingdom could manage with some luck to set a foot on the American continent, until New Carthage or Punic Britain would also get the news about the gold, and it would lead to a rush where the Slavic Celtic kingdom would have better cards to establish themselves because they would not be overextended, unlike the two Carthages. India would be united by a Mongol ruler, or at least have a similar entity as the Mughal Empire, but without Islam. So this Mughal Empire would be a more Hindu or a Buddhist Mughal Empire, and I think due to the fact that Buddhism is more popular than Hinduism in Mongolia, the chances are very high that we might have a fully Buddhist India. And also Southeast Asia would culturally be very close to India, due to the fact that there is no Islam, that would then somehow cut the ties with India. China and Japan will still exist, of course, but on different terms, and if China realizes that they shouldn't just sit around and do nothing, they would be able to expand. Although this is very unlikely. We will have more diverse countries in Siberia and also in Australia, and a more disunited and diverse world. Technology could be perhaps even centuries behind, but not be totally lost or unknown, as the Romans happened to copy very often the peoples they conquered. It is not unlikely that architecture from Razna could be exported even further beyond than the former Celtic parts, so Razna could be known as the place where many architectural styles would be established, also statues and other things, and it would then, similarly as during the Renaissance from Italy, start to spread all across. And then we have ships. They would be exported from near Carthage, and then maybe when an Incan empire still rises and will have very stable conditions, we might have very Incan road plans and road systems with stations where you could fill in, and also have messengers being sent from one place to another. The world will be unrecognizable, very different and very diverse. Without Rome, not one thing or two things will happen differently, but a whole millennia will be lost, and connections that were made within the borders of the Roman Empire might actually never take place in this alternate timeline. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.